afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Michael Boudro. I'm the archivist at Durand Union Station in the Michigan Railroad History Museum. I'm also the curator of the museum downstairs. Today we are having a panel discussion with some people who are very instrumental in saving this building and the nonprofit that is charged with maintaining and preserving it today. On the panel we have current treasurer, but he's been around since the beginning, Mr. Dan Brooks.
Lauretta Bradley.
I knew that because I asked. Ms. Lauretta Bradley, Ms. Norma Ward, State Representative Bus Spaniola, and former Executive Director of Durand Union Station Corporate, Vivian Van Norwick. So this sort of discussion is basically us helping to jog our own memory. So we're going to break this up into 3 time periods. We're going to start with Bicentennial to baggage car to Ducey, and then Ducey onward. And we're just going to see where the conversation goes. So this is not a question and answer session. We're not going to take questions from the audience for the sake of time. We're just going to sort of see where this conversation goes, and hopefully it ends up being really interesting and maybe fun at times and sad at others, and we'll just see how it goes. So if we're ready to get started, I'm going to start. We have 2 microphones there in case you need to project. So we'll go there. One's wireless and one's wired. We're going to start with the beginning of this whole endeavor to save this building from the wrecking ball. And I believe that started, if I recall, with the formation of the Bicentennial Committee. And I think probably the most appropriate person to start that story would be Norma Ward. So, Norma, what do you know about the Bicentennial Committee?
I know it was,
That's not on. I'll make you fix that for it.
I couldn't find it in button. Oh. Well, it pretty well tells the beginning of the Bicentennial, where it says 1974 up there. And that's when we became involved. We had a small group of people who moved along, and we added some and we lost some. But the Bicentennial was to be in 3 different groups. And you had to do a history, and you had to do something that you were going to save. And naturally, in Durand, we had to convince the people from Bancroft and Vernon that was going to be part of our Bicentennial that we wanted to save the Durand Depot. It's rather strange the way that some people would take a double take at you when you'd say you wanted to save the Durand Depot. And I guess that's where they got the name Norma's Folly, because I was called a lot of other names besides that that I really would rather forget. But anyway, the Bicentennial was a lot of fun. We had fantastic people working in it, and my part of it was working toward the depot, and the other groups were a flag ceremony where all the flags we made, just about all of them, and then George Weber and Millie Smith and Mike Kovacic and a couple, 3 other people would take that flag show around to other cities. If they wanted them. If they didn't want them, that was okay, but they were invited to be able to go there. And then there was the written part of the Bicentennial, where you were to record the history, not just show what you've done, but to record the history. And that was pretty much done by Jean Sloan, Irene Sedlak, and Helen Kalachek. They put together a small little Bicentennial book. As you can see, we had dancers, we had craft shows, we had plays, we had instruments, we had people who came during the Bicentennial. And then we only stayed with the Bicentennial for 2 years, 74 to 76. And then all of our efforts went on the Durand, trying to get the Durand Depot. So that's the Bicentennial part of it. want me to go any further?
Did it jog anybody else's memory about the bicentennial or any of that fun stuff? Or none of the mics are on. Sorry about that.
Yeah, the the bicentennial was pretty memorable in my mind because I was getting close to the end of my career with the JCs at that time, and the JCs were quite very active in Durand during that time period. We used to host the July 4th celebration, the parades, and so forth, and the fireworks display, which was a fundraiser for the next year. And I remember a picture of JC's. We did a beard growing contest that year to commemorate the bicentennial, and there was a picture that somebody handed to me years later with what you might call a half beard.
Who won the beard growing contest? Do you remember?
It was not me. I think it was a fellow by the name of Donnie Babka, who was an active member at that time. But there was a lot of, like Norma said, there was a lot of activity building up to that, and then of course the rumors coming out about the fact is that since the depot had been abandoned and was going to be scheduled for demolition, that there became a stronger effort to get the paperwork started to get that prevented in doing that. And Norma said earlier that it became known as Norma's Folly. And I've told this story many times, Norma, that when she heard I was getting exhausted from the JCs, and we had one of our projects had been to help secure the windows down below from vandalism and so forth. She called and said, "Well, Dan, you want to help save the depot?" And I'd seen the inside of the depot, and a number of other people had, and I think my comments were, "Norma, you're crazy." But she laughed at me and she says, "No, we're not crazy. We're going to save the depot." So I figured if she felt that strong about it, then that's kind of where I got kind of involved in the early days on the committee that was formulated to, and that's, of course, Vivian Van Norwick became involved along that way as well, and a number of other people that were decided to run this committee. So, but anyways, that's a couple of reflections from my experience with the bicentennial.
I got here after all the hard work was done. That was all.
Okay. Well, I was running for office at the year that the bicentennial group was formed, and of course, I've always had a great love for this building for a lot of reasons. As a little kid coming over here with my dad, riding on the train for the first time and all of that. But after I was elected, it wasn't very long that I got a visit from Norma. She came up to my office, and as I remember, correct me if I'm wrong here, she came up to my office and we started talking about saving this wonderful place. And Dave Thayer was my chief of staff at the time. Of course, Dave later became very involved in the group here, and we started to do what we thought we could do at the time to try to save the place. And you know, our contribution and my contribution is small in many ways compared to the work that a whole lot of other people did. It's kind of complicated, really, if you take a look at all the problems that we had in Lansing to deal with this operation here. We had a legislature that didn't want Amtrak running, and by the way, that hasn't changed a whole lot. Okay, and Amtrak was really key, in my opinion, to at least having some kind of revenue coming into this place. And of course, we had a Department of Transportation that was no offense to them, their you know their ideas were concrete related. But in any event, we went to work in Lansing to try to do what we could. Viv, of course, was on the staff for a while, and she can tell you some stories about that. I thought it was so important that we work on this from a legislative perspective that I called Dave Thayer in my office and I said, Dave, I think this is something that's going to take more time than I think I can devote alone to it. So I want you to get deeply involved, to engross yourself in this. You keep me informed so that we don't miss anything. Anyway, Dave got involved, and then of course, I remember, I was talking to my wife about this, I remember the day that we got the call about the wrecking ball being in the yard. In fact, Carol was telling me, and she's sitting in the back by the way, was telling me that she doesn't remember who called her, but someone tried to call my office, and I was in session. And, you know, they didn't bother us when we were in session unless the world was coming to an end, you know. And Carol related that she got this call at our business in Owasso. He said, "How do you get a hold of that husband of yours?" Well, anyway, she got word through to me, and you know, we were all concerned because, of course, hey, this place would have been gone, and you understand. We have to be fair about this. The Canadian National Railroad, Grand Trunk, they were interested in the bottom line. We call them bean counters, and we don't call them that in a bad way. It's just a business decision. So what are we going to do here with this big building? And my recollection is that one of the things that really mitigated saving this place, can thank the Durand city government for a little maneuver that they made, and it changed the attitude at Canadian National Railroad. Let me tell you what that maneuver was. I think all of you should be aware, but if you're not, you should know this. You understand, if they tore this building down, there's an awful lot of debris that had to be taken care of. Well, the allowances here in the city at that time were that you could bury this stuff. You could bury the debris. Well, the city council got together to change the rules that you had to move the stuff away. And look at what they would have had to move away from here. Well, that sent a message to Toronto, I think, is where the headquarters is. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it might be Montreal.
Or Montreal, but wherever in Canada, that sent a message that jogged them a bit, and of course gave the group here in Durand and those of us that were interested in working on it in the legislature a little bit of room to work, more than a little bit of room to work. Because you're talking about the bottom line again. And before we knew it, the city was taking ownership of the depot. I think it cost them $1, if I'm not wrong here. But in any event, when that happened, then we began to be able to see the progress. And I remember during a political campaign in 1976, I remember then Senator Walter Mondale, who was running for vice president, came to town, and I had the duty and the honor to kind of take him around. We all were of the same political persuasion, Mondale and I, of course, much to some people's chagrin. But in any event, we took him around town, and we were down. I forget what restaurant it was. We were having lunch with some people here in town, and we were talking about things in Durand. We were talking about the depot, and one thing led to another. And he and I got our heads together after that luncheon, and he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, if you've got any influence in Washington, send some money." And he was elected, and you know, he and Carter were elected, and he didn't forget what he promised. I can't remember how much it was. It was either 50 grand or 75,000. Maybe you remember, Norma.
I don't remember, other than the money that we got from the FRA, that came through, but I made I received information from people in Battle Creek about that, and they gave me some names to get a hold of, and I did make some calls to those people. They gave me some ideas of how to and who to talk to.
That amount,
FRA.
that amount was about $78,000.
I thought it was
Yeah.
close to that. In any event, he had a great influence on that, and of course, at that time I had been communicating with Senator Don Regal, then Senator Don Regal, who was an old friend of mine at the time, and I said, you know, see what you can do to help us. So, you know, that began the process of some money flowing in here from outside of the area, not to mention the hard work that people were doing here, obviously. But in any event, I've probably talked too long. Viv, maybe you got something to add here.
Well, when I got here, as I said, the hard work had really been done. The building had been saved. And as I think back, my recollections of that are the stories that I heard from Norma, from Dan, from John Walworth, from lots of other people, Margaret Sadunik. And there were many things, there were some maneuverings at the city, and Norma's going to have to tell me whether or not I have the right interpretation of all of this, because you lived it. I came in afterwards. But one of the things about this building is that it was put on the historical registry. And that was one of the things that was instrumental in saving it. And at that time, which is no longer the case, you can actually get a building put on the historic registry without the owner's permission. And I think Bus has told you about how Grand Trunk felt about this. The bottom line, if we had had to get their permission, or I should say if these lovely people up here had to get their permission, that probably wouldn't have been forthcoming.
Well, the person that was, I have to make sure that she gets credit for it. I want to be sure that Margaret Zadunik gets credit for the fact that she put it on the national register. Now, the Michigan register wouldn't have done it for her, but she was smart enough to know that you get that on the national register, and then they couldn't tear it down. Although I wouldn't have been surprised that Grand Trunk would anyway. But I also know that I have to give credit to Kevin McKinney.
Thank you.
Because Kevin worked very closely with me and with the Attorney General's office. And the day that we were taking the stuff out of the depot that they told us we could have one day, his friend, Bob Taub, from the Attorney General's office, came up to talk to me, and I'm all full of soot and sweating, and he wanted to talk to me, and I said, I don't have time, I'm sorry, we gotta load this stuff on this truck. And he said, I'm from the Attorney General's office, and I thought, oh, maybe I better take a little time.
In order to get the wrecker ball to make that first swing, Grand Trunk needed to get the signature of the city manager, Ward Morgan. Ward Morgan disappeared. He just wasn't around to sign the paperwork.
Nobody knew where he was.
Pardon?
Nobody knew where he was.
Nobody knew where he was, and he was gone from Friday till the following Monday, and days may be wrong. When I got here as the director, Norma greeted me. Our office was at City Hall, And they made believers out of me until the night that we had our first board meeting in the building. The windows were still boarded. Everybody was gone, but I and one other person. And that person was standing in the entranceway of the main room downstairs into the hallway and flicked off the light switch. And the room was totally black. I could not see the person across the room, and I thought, oh dear God, what have I got myself into? And it seemed insurmountable. One lady introduced herself to me a few minutes ago as a depot volunteer, and I said that's what made it possible. Bus was wonderful and securing some funding for us, but it was the volunteers who were always there to do whatever you needed, and it's the backbone of any organization like this. And as I came today, I was sharing this with Norma and with Bus earlier. My husband, Mom, and I got stopped by 2 trains. Go figure. And I remember what Norma told me that she used to tell her children as they were growing up. If you get stopped by a train, that's a good thing, because the trains mean a good economy. And this town was in love with this building, and there were enough people that it became important enough to save. And I just feel so privileged to have even had some small part in it. And like I say, the hard work came before I got here. And I was privileged to have these 3 people sitting here as board members when I came, and Bus sitting in the legislature, helping us get iced tea monies to do the restoration. So I was truly blessed.
And what you need to know is he got the money. But you know what? Martha Bigelow, who was in charge of the Michigan History Division, she held back his money for us for a long time, because she was going to have her museum, and maybe you've been to that new museum and library in Lansing. When she got her building built, they released the money. Right?
Okay, so simultaneously in the effort to save the building, we acquire a baggage car. So this is us. We've sort of overshot the baggage car. So we're going to back up a little bit and connect to that. So the next sort of topic, we've done bicentennial to baggage car. Let's talk about the baggage car, the creation of that museum, because that ties into what we're doing this weekend at Railroad Days. So let's talk about how the baggage car came about, because I know Norma has one heck of a story about who sold that to her. And we'll talk about the original museum in town, and then how that museum kind of turns into Durand Union Station Incorporated. So Norma, let's talk about the baggage car. How did you get the baggage car?
Well, it was pretty easy. After we got it, it was harder. I went down to look for cabooses. Well, they were a bunch of junk. And so I was in Pontiac with my husband, almost to the insane asylum by then at Pontiac, but no, we went to Grand Trunk and asked if I could look at the baggage car that I saw sitting on siding. And they allowed me to go and look at it. And I asked who I had to see to buy the baggage car. So they took me to the office, and I said I'd like to buy it to take to Durand. And he said, I said, well, I only have $1,000. And I didn't even have the $1,000. But he said, well, I can get more money with scrapping it than that, and let it go for $1,000. Well, that's all I got. And I said, and your last name is Durand. He said, yes. So I said, wouldn't you like to have that baggage car in Durand? And he said, well, I'd have to go and ask if we can sell that to you. So I waited 2 days, and I came back, and I talked to 10 different people asking for $100. And so I had the money, but I didn't take the money. And till they called and said, well, yeah, you can come down, and we'll make arrangements for you to get the baggage car. So I collected the $100 from everybody and went down with the money before they changed their mind and got it paid for. And I said, now, when can Grand Trunk bring it to Durand? And they said, we're not going to take that to Durand. And I said, well, how could I get it there? I said, can't you just hook it on one of your trains? Well, that took a little talking, but finally he said, well, I'll see what I can do. Well, you know, I'm not in that department. And so then I thought, well, I don't know how we get it here. We can't put it on the back of anybody's trailer. So anyway, then I did get a call, not from Mr. Durand, but from the real estate office. And they wanted to be paid for it. Well, I'd already made kind of friendship with a man named John Williams, and I asked him what I could do. So he gave me the name of somebody else, and I don't know how they manipulated that, but anyway, they said that they wouldn't decide. They didn't know when they could bring it. Whenever there was room on a train, they'd bring it to the Durand yards, which they did, but they didn't notify me when it got there, so it was broken into by the time that I got there 2 days later, and they'd stole all the lights out, and they stole the little coal stove that was in there, and just stuff like that. But it made me mad, and not being very nice about it. I went into the office down there and I said, when that baggage car came, why wasn't I notified? You know, like I was somebody that I'm telling Grand Trunk people about. Well, they didn't know anybody broke into it. So anyway, well, that's the way we got it here.
I think a running theme in all these stories is that Norma's very persuasive. Or failing that, very stubborn and will refuse to take no for an answer. So we've acquired a baggage car. How did it become a museum?
Well, all the spit on the wall from the guys that chewed tobacco, and all the rest of the dirt in there. My husband and I, we started cleaning up. And a young fellow, his last name was George, and I can't remember his first name. He stopped by to see what was going on. He was a high school boy. He became one of my best pals, I'll tell you. He didn't care about all that dirt, cleaning it up, and he was helping clean it up. And when we got ready to paint, he's helping me paint. And he stuck with me for quite a while trying to get that cleaned up. And then a few people would pop in. They couldn't pop in. They had to climb up like I was on the side of the car. You went in and out like that for a long time, taking all your equipment in there, because it was a long time before Simplicity. A man there said, I think I can get Simplicity to give me the steel. And I have some fellows that will work with me after work, and we will build you 2 sets of stairs, in and out. Hey, that was about the best news that I had without having gone and fought for it. I didn't know somebody was just going to come and offer. And so those beautiful steps there. Max, he lives in Owasso, anyway. I should remember his last name, and I don't. I know. Oh, King, Max King. And, but the thing that was so interesting is you didn't know who to ask. And if somebody stuck their head in to see what we were doing, they were so curious they came in. And then I'd get a little more help. And then one of the best things that happened when we had just about all ready, because it was cleaned up, and we could start looking for some furniture for there, and I went to a barn where the chickens were living in these pieces of, and I asked if we could have them because they were real old-fashioned and they had glass in them, and I guess we're still using some of them downstairs. So we brought those over and cleaned those all up. And Mac McGinnity, he did some refinishing of them. And then a teacher from school, Paul, and let me see if I got his name. Anyway, Brian Reed and the teacher from school decided they'd like to do a project in there. And the project was they would want to put a little train all around the top of the museum. Well, I never thought of that. But I thought, hey, that's one of the best things that we could have. So they paid for all of the everything. And they built this track all around the top, got the trains running, so that when we were open, little kids would come in, and we'd have music, sometimes the sound of trains, and they'd say, oh, it's moving, and they thought, you know, the train and everything was making noise up there. But you know, the thing about developing something like that was, if you got one person that you could get on your side and be excited about it, they came up with ideas that were so fantastic. And not anything that we put in there, not even the carpet, did we have to buy, because Sparling Hammond came over and looked and they said, oh, we got some black and white. It's not selling very good anyway. I can put this down here for you. Wow, that stuff I think is still in there, and I think it's wearing good. And so, you know, you have no idea the number of people who become involved. You know, the credit that I got was being stubborn enough to make sure we got the baggage card. But it's the other people and those volunteers who developed it. And without volunteers, we wouldn't even have this people. That's right. But that, my crew of people that worked with the museum in that baggage car, they were as sad could be. They had a terrible time voting to give up our baggage car museum and to turn all of our assets over to Durand Union Station. And they were such loyal people, so loyal, and had put not just money into it, but their heart and soul. And we used to get so many people through that little baggage car. Kids from schools, because I write letters to schools and senior centers. And we get all kinds of people coming through there.
So you have a museum built. The museum is open. You have a grand opening for it. at the end of April in 1976, and they decided to call that Railroad Days.
Yeah. About 1975, when we were starting to call. Actually, the person who named it Railroad Days was Owen Rudd, and he was the newspaper.
Owner and editor of the Durand Express.
And Owen had asked in one of his columns for an organization in Durand to take over and try to save the depot. And no organization came forward, and they had a meeting at the city hall where they wanted people to come and see whether you'd like to develop a bicentennial for the area, which was going to be Vernon and Bancroft and Lennon and Durand. And so the council thought it was a good idea, and they asked me to write letters to all these other communities to see if they would join. I wrote letters. Then I got hooked into being chair because nobody would be the chair. So you do one little thing for somebody and you get hooked. So that's how I learned how to hook everybody else in.
Okay, so the Baggage Car Museum, the Durand Railroad Museum, is open from 1976 to, and now we get to 1985.
Yeah.
And the depot was purchased by the city of Durand in 1979. So there's this period of time where you have an existing railroad museum, and you have the dream to turn the depot into a museum. So there's actually sort of a museum and a half going in Durand at the same time. So now we're into the institution of the organization and the creation of Durand Union Station Incorporated. So we're getting closer to current day. And maybe we can get Lauretta into the conversation now.
That's about when my work started. She was on the telephone calling. She was on the telephone calling various people. I worked at Simplicity and I happened to be in the personnel department, and we created rules and regulations and all that sort of thing, you know, for personnel. And she thought that information might be of value to the board, and asked if I would be willing to serve on the board. And I don't recall if that was the first of the board or if I came on.
It was an advisory board, yeah. Well, we had a few people, but then we added to it.
And as Vivian said, all of the really major, wonderful things had already happened. But this building sat here like monstrously, you know, and one of my, I guess, fondest memories now, it was sort of depressing at first, but it was really hard to get, other than that crew, that beginning crew of volunteers who were wonderful. We had the naysayers in town and around town. Oh my God, that's never going to work. You know, that's just pouring money down that hole. And but the volunteer group grew, and as it grew, and the building began to have improvements made, and we had fundraisers, and that kept Vivian here. And but improvements to the building, and then it was dealing with contractors, and I didn't deal with contractors, but I was on the board all that time, so it was a very interesting process. But the process also included the attitude change throughout the community. Not that it's 100% yet, but the volunteer group grew, and as all of these improvements became made, then it grew even more. People began to want to get involved. And my dad was an engineer on the railroad, and probably most of the people who lived in Durand had someone working on the railroad here out of Durand. And Dan, you can add a lot more to this.
I'd like to make just another statement about the wrecking ball. I didn't even know it was over there and out there. Like David Lewis said, he had it out there on the tracks. Somebody, and I have no idea who it was to this day, sent me a picture of an old lady sitting in front of a depot with a gun. never sent that to me in the mail. Never knew.
Do you know who the old lady was?
Well, I thought, I don't remember sitting there, but somebody take my picture.
It may be possible, though.
Do you still have that photo? Do you still have that photo?
You know, I don't know where it is.
Oh, goodness.
I have not run across that, but it was so funny. And at first, you know, it was real funny. And then as I tried to talk to some people about business people downtown about whether they would help us with some money, and they all declined. You know, they wouldn't give a cent for the white elephant. And then I kept thinking, I wish there was that woman in front of that gun. But anyway, the turn of events, you never could have predicted. There's no way you could predict what would happen. And it was the board of Durand Union Station at the time in '91 when they asked us to close our baggage car because they didn't feel that it was right that there were two railroad museums. So that's when it was hard to take it to the board for that museum and ask them if they would. And some of them didn't vote for it, but the majority did. They understood that our original, at the bicentennial, it says right on that poster, Save the Depot was our aim as far as where we started. But some of the people followed and became volunteers at the depot. Several of them didn't. They were just kind of broken-hearted over it. And I could understand that. It was a hard thing to give up.
Well, you got to where I was going to go with that, because before I wanted to move forward with Ducey in the depot, I wanted to sort of close the book on the Railroad Museum with the baggage car. So
one of the other conditions that, if I remember correctly, was that we didn't incorporate as a 501c3 until 1983.
85.
Excuse me, 85. Thank you. I got 83. And there had been, I remember comments have been made because the baggage car museum was already a functioning entity and was producing revenue and so forth, and that the question had been was, could this advisory board group pull this off to get the building stabilized enough and with the front lobby ready to take on a tenant? And there was a timeline that had to be done within after the lease had been signed between Grand Trunk and the city. In April. And then we had to say, okay, if we're going to have a museum and a gift shop, we've got to have the space prepared for that. And so during that time period, that's when the discussions were going on about phasing out the baggage car museum, and there have been questions pro and cons, like Norma had said. But then when the decision was finally made, after we could show that we could house sufficiently the museum and the gift shop, the committee for the baggage car made a presentation to the Durand Union Station in the form of transfer of the ownership of the baggage car and the assets of the gift shop that they had in stock at the time, and approximately $700 in their checking account.
12,000.
Oh, no, I'm thinking, okay, that $700 was the amount of the inventory that was turned over. $12,000, yeah, sorry. So it's, that's kind of where that kind of now merged the two organizations, if you will. So we were becoming our own nonprofit organization legally with the eyes of the IRS and so forth.
The reason I had to interrupt Dan about how much we turned over is that was proof to everybody that we had been successful. that we could have that much money from that little operation there. And wasn't that I wanted to interrupt, but I was so proud that we were turning over. But that was to make sure that they did something with the baggage car. That was to, if there were any expenses, if they used the baggage car for anything, that money would take care of, but then it was never really used other than for a group of railroad. They let the people in to use that for kind of their railroad. They met there, and we were paying out of that $12,000. The money was all being paid just to let them use it as a club house.
I think that one of the important things is when Durand Union Station was finally incorporated, the success of the group that had run the baggage car museum and the money they were able to turn over actually helped give us some credibility to move forward. And although it was a transition, I think the work of these people went forward and it helped us get started. So I think it was also important from that perspective. Now, why a nonprofit at that particular time? Well, it opened up the opportunity to raise grant money and to be eligible for grants. Whereas if it had been maintained as a city project, they wouldn't have been eligible for various kinds of grant money. So there was it was a way of developing the project. Norma, I don't know if I should tell this or not. Should I tell them about the card you gave me after I started?
Go ahead.
Well,
I have no secrets.
There's no secrets, okay. Well, I have two stories, one to tell on Norma and one to tell on Lauretta. Oh. Well, when I started, first of all, I became aware of the depot through my work at Bus's office, and I was asked to interview for the position. And I came that night, and there was, I was new to the area. I was the new kid on the block, and I didn't have I wasn't the hometown girl who had necessarily the dedication that those folks who were involved in sitting on that committee had worked for years. And I'll never forget Jean Sloan said to me, how do we know that you're going to follow through and that you're really going to be dedicated to this? And I said, well, it's very simple. I said, if you don't believe that, then don't hire me. I said, I think you guys need to discuss this. I'll go out in the lobby. And David Thayer looked at me like, you have so just blown it. And so they talked, and pretty soon after a long time, they came and got me and said, well, we decided we'd hire you. So we got started, and there had been, the city manager at the time was Dan Post.
Oh, don't remind me.
And there was something that had gone on. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there were some concerns about some legalities, shall we say. I had been on the job for less than a month, and I got a card from Norma, and it showed a baboon in a jail cell. And that was, she said, good luck. So that was one of my welcoming entries to Durand Union Station. We did a lot of fundraising. raffles, from the raffling a car to when everybody got dissatisfied with the car. Well, I want a green car instead of the blue one you're raffling. Could I put a few more dollars towards that? And then I can get a better car. We decided no car. And we started the carless car raffle. So that became an ongoing fundraiser. The damage done to the interior of the building was great. And the marble was broken off the wall. So what did we do with the pieces of marble? Another idea of Norma's. They were sold as paperweights with a label on the bottom that said Durand Union Station. So we were very creative in the way we raised money. And as I have said, there was iced tea money that was made available through the state government, and Bus was very helpful in helping us secure that money. So we finally raised a sizable amount of money. And we had an architect that were ready to get started on the first renovation project. We're talking about a lot of money. We're talking about a huge thing that everybody had worked for. And the discussion went on, the discussion went on, the motion was made to do this project, and the discussion went on, and all of a sudden, the lady from Simplicity says, you know what, no guts, no blue chips. I hadn't forgot I've used that line forever. And everybody just paused and stepped back and looked and said, I said, all of those in favor? And the hands went up, it was unanimous, and we implemented our first project. And all of a sudden, I think as has been alluded to, there was all of the doubt, is it Norma's folly, is this ever going to happen? But once the first project was completed, people began to believe. And even the naysayers had less ammunition. And then the project really began to take off. So, Lauretta, I'll never forget. No guts, no blue chips.
If I may, I know time is of the essence here, but a couple of allusions have been made to the fact that people didn't believe in the project. And wherever you go, you got a situation like this, you know, where you got a building that people really don't understand as neat as it is, because you know you see it every day. You run into that kind of problem. But I'll tell you this: my wife and I are great fans of Amtrak, and we ride long distance, and we've been on every long distance Amtrak train run in the U.S. with the exception of the Crescent that goes from New York to New Orleans. We'll do that one day. It's on our bucket list. But I tell you that because I've seen depots all over this country. And I want to tell you, maybe it's just an opinion, I'm not an architect, you know, just an ordinary observer, if you will. But in my mind, you got to go a long way to beat this place. It is a fabulous building. It's beautiful. It's, you know, it's, in my opinion, in terms of the days of railroading, is state of the art, if you will. And we don't, well, if it's in our neighborhood, we don't totally appreciate it. And I'm glad that people here have done the job of saving this place and continuing to make it grow. You know, we've got some work to do yet. Norma and I were talking about this earlier. One of the things that always bothered me, I was considered it one of the failures that I was involved in. And I was on the board here for a while after I got out of the legislature. We have talked about having better access to this place. And no matter what we do, we were never able to pull it off. Whether it was an overpass, or whether it was an underpass, or whether we get the railroad to break down and allow us to have some traffic come across. That's a project that in my mind needs to be completed. And, I think it'll happen if you just don't give up. Really. And people of Durand should remember, and the people of Shiawassee County should remember this. And I learned this from my teenagers. Of course, they're not teenagers anymore. I used to listen to a song called Ashes to Ashes. I can't remember who the performers were, but I remember the words. And please think about this. They're tearing down the street where I grew up. That's like pouring brandy in a Dixie cup. They're paving concrete on a part of me. No crime for killing off a memory. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about more. We're talking about a memory, but we're talking about more than that. This depot is this community, in this man's opinion. You think of Durand, you see this building. And when I was teaching school here, way back when I was a young guy, I was telling some people earlier, you've got to hear this because, this depot was this railroad, well, the railroad more than the depot was a great excuse for the kids here. First hour in the morning, first hour in the afternoon, if they were late, they always had the excuse that the train stopped them. And I consider it an honor and privilege to have had anything at all to do with the saving of this building.
I have to tell you about 2 years ago, or 2 years ago, I received this book in the mail. And I didn't know it was out. It only been out, I guess, about a year when she sent it to me. She lives out east. And I open it up, and there's on the front of that book, the cover of the book is Durand Union Station. I went downstairs because we had one downstairs and I wanted to bring it up. I had so much other stuff to bring, I didn't want to bring my book. But there was almost every state, I believe there was, every state where they had taken pictures of depots in big cities and small. And I cried when I realized that of all of those across the United States, the pictures had been taken. They chose our depot to put on the cover. That's the greatest feeling you'd ever have. That was, to me, a winner. That made me know that our station, just like Bus said, is a winner, or it wouldn't have been taken from every other state.
Excuse me, Norma. Along with that, 1996, may have mentioned, I've got the magazine at home, I've saved it. National Geographic did a photo shoot across the country. And they designated this as the most photogenic freestanding depot in the country.
This building is not just a local interest, it has become a destination. It's amazing when you work as a volunteer. People come in and you get to talking about where they're from, many times from out of state, and they had no other reason for coming into Durand, except they had read or heard about this building. And it's been fascinating to watch that.
There's something else I need to give a credit, or somebody else I need to give a credit for. Remember I said that as I went from business to business to try to get some money for the depot when we first started. And nobody gave it. They said no. And several years later, Dick Anderson said, and some people I told this to, He apologized. He said, I am so sorry that I didn't believe in you. But he said, I didn't see how it could ever be done. And he said, and I owe you an apology for not being behind that project. Who became one of the best supporters of our station? Dick Anderson, his wife, his kids. And that is a reward in itself. That one person, that one business person in town would say, and didn't have to be all of them, but that one of them would say what he did. And I said, that takes a big man to do it.
We've hit the hour mark, so I was going to give my panelists one last closing thought, but I think you've all hit it pretty hard. Any other thoughts?
I just want to say thank you for the homecoming. Being able to be here today with all these folks just has touched my heart. Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
Well, if you've got any questions, I think it should be up to you. A lot of you are already so involved
Dan's got
that,
one more thing he wants to say.
I wanted to go back to Bus's comments about earlier on about the processes that were involved in saving the building, the paperwork, and the miles that traveled to accomplish that. I had the opportunity a few years ago to attend a meeting of the Lexington group. And one of the attendees there was John Burdigan, who was president of Grand Trunk Railroad at the time the decision was made to abandon it. And Sam was also, Sam Brett, excuse me, thank you, was also at that meeting. And he had invited me to come down to the meeting. And so after the lunch was served, the Lexington group, for those of you who don't know, it was a group of retired and affiliated people in the railroading industry. And they had meetings in different places around Michigan. And Sam Brett pointedly asked John Burdigan, would you have torn down the depot if you know what had happened? And like Bus said, it was economics. Grand Trunk was on the brink of bankruptcy. And John was very candid. He says, well, I had to make a choice. My position was on the line. I was ordered to cut costs. This was a liability to the railroad. And we felt this was the cheapest way to get out of it, because we didn't want to continue paying liability insurance and this and so forth. So, but he says, after seeing what's happened to the depot, do I regret it? He says, heck yes, I do, terribly. And while he was strongly against what took place initially to turn the depot, if you want to call it the maneuvering or whatever, because it had gone against the, in a sense, the orders to take it out. He later on donated a sizable amount of money and other artifacts from his own personal collection that originally came from this building and his other locations. So he became a very strong supporter.
I have to add something to that. I worked with Bill Glavin, who was the vice chair along with Burdigan. And he was a tough guy. In fact, he's the one that gave me the name, about being a strong-headed German. Because he asked me what my nationality was, and I said, I'm German. He says, that's why you're so stubborn. And but when he retired from the railroad and was going to move down to Naples, Florida, he called me on the phone and he said, well, he said, Norma, I want to tell you that I'm glad that you're that stubborn German, because he said, I was only doing my job. I gave you a rough time, but I was only doing my job. And I reminded him that when we opened the Amtrak room downstairs, he gave me pictures of 3 depots, and I thanked him for it. And then after our little ceremony was over, I said to him, what is the significance of these pictures you gave me? And he said, those are the ones we tore down. But John Burdekin wrote me a lovely note telling me that he was so happy that the depot has been preserved. And he said the same thing that Gladden did. It was my job. And he has proven, ever since he's been retired, of his support. And Mary has had notes from the family. And so we know that when it's a job, it's tough to get away from it, even though your feelings are different. But there's another 2 great men that were willing to tell us how they felt.
May I say something more about John Burdigan? I ran into him in another Save the Depot program. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but the Elks Temple in Owasso, former Grand Trunk Depot, was in danger. And I remember then Congressman Albasta, who was a former colleague of mine, and I met over there at that depot. And I want to tell you, this Burdigan was one tough cookie. I mean, I'm saying that not in a bad way. He was just a tough businessman. And we both of us were put through our paces to get him to work with us to help save that depot as well. So. While I'm not the savior of anything, I'm delighted to say there was another one that I was involved in, and I learned a little more about dealing with this guy who was really one tough businessman.
His picture is up there in the corner. John Burdigan came to Durand for a meeting here in Durand and a dinner. And John Walworth got him to come over to go into our baggage car. It hadn't opened yet. It was opening the next day. He brought all of his executives with him, and he's the first one that signed the guest book in our little baggage car. I guess he felt that, hey, that's part of our company there, But he was so, every one of those men were so nice. And to walk into that old baggage car and talk about how, oh, this is really nice, I mean, I got big-headed just listening to him, Wow.
Okay, so.
Could I say one word?
By all means.
We are only part of the history of this building. And the mention was made of Sam Breck, who also served at one time on our advisory board. And Sam's gift, I think, to the people he touched was to teach us the value of history and oral history. And so today, to have the opportunity to talk with these people is to preserve part of the history of this building, of this corporation that was formed. And I'm sure that many of you in this room have your own set of memories, or you know someone who does. And I would just like to make a plea on behalf of the people who are here now, the archivist, Mary, all of you who are working so hard as volunteers. If you have those memories, share them. Because that's what this building is. It's the history of an era of rail. It's the history, as I said, of the love of a community for a building and its history. And so if any of you have those things in your homes that should be here as artifacts, if you have memories that you can share, do so. Because the history of the people who have been involved with this building isn't going to be here forever. It dies when they do, and we've already lost too many of those wonderful people. Margaret Zadunik, Jean Sloan, Ward Morgan, Sam Ryder, an attorney who was involved, help me. I know I'm missing somebody and I hesitate to start mentioning names because you always leave someone out. But please, if you have something to share, please do so, because it's very important.
I want to make mention of that picture up there. And the look I got on my face is not very happy. I wasn't happy. Sam Brick took that picture of me. He was always calling me or sending me tapes and stuff. And I made a statement to him about how discouraged I was. The statement I made is up there by that picture. But he had somebody bring him because he couldn't drive anymore because of his eyesight. Somebody brought him to the depot. And he said, I want you over there standing in that grassy area with a bunch of weeds with the depot in the background. And it took 3 or 4 feet. And he said, I want you to think about the statement that you made to me about how discouraged you were. And I guess it came back to me really good because I sure got one heck of a look on my face.
I want to just add one thing. I'm sorry I'm pushing this a little far, but what Vivian was talking about, the great story that's here, you know, in the hour and 10 or 15 minutes that we've spoken, all we've done is scratch the surface. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about all the things that I and my office went through. I could write a book about this. I mean,
You better do that.
We haven't begun to touch, you know, some of the things, some of the stuff that happened in the Capitol. You know, you'd find very, very interesting, by the way.
Now, by the way, his memoirs and all his paperwork is in his garage, and I have been after him since he retired to write that book. Is that correct, Carol?
I couldn't have come up with a better segue. The sign on the door on the way in says first annual, and you said we've just scratched the surface. So Norma, you need to stick around, stubbornly hang on, and let's do a second annual, and we'll come up with a new discussion to talk about. But we found 5 people to talk about the history of this organization, and there are countless more. Some that are not in the room, some that are in the back of the room, some that aren't with us anymore, like John Burdikin and others. But this organization and this building doesn't exist without some really stubborn people and some very dedicated people, and we found 5 of them to talk to you today. So thank you to the panelists. Thank
you for coming.
Yes.